Hi, I'm Luciana from Masters College, and today I'm going to show you how to solve a critical reasoning exercise from GMAT. Okay, so the first thing that you will notice is that I have blocked the answer choices. Now, bear in mind that in the real test, the answer choices are not going to be there to guide you or to help you, but actually, they are going to be there to confuse you. So, what we're going to do is we're going to try to work with our own understanding of the passage, making sure that we follow the steps without reading the answer choices and without feeling the need to use the answer choices to guide us. So, the first step that we're going to start with is we're going to read the question and we're going to try to identify the type of question that we're dealing with. In this case, it says which of the following, if true, would be most damaging to the conclusion above. Now, this is a question that belongs to the assumption family. More specifically, this is a weekend type of question. How do we know that? The phrasing, basically. Since it's asking us to find which one would be the most damaging to the conclusion, we know that this is a weekend type of question. Now, for the second step, what we're going to do is we're going to read the passage and we're going to do argument deconstruction. That is, we're going to discuss the different building blocks that basically build the argument. So, the passage says many companies use automated telephone services. Callers hear a machine generated voice and are able to select options using the numbers on the telephone keypad. Research shows that callers are more patient when the machine generated voice is that of a woman. Thus, smaller companies that cannot afford an automated service should consider hiring women rather than men to interact with customers by phone. Okay, so the first thing that we should find, since it tends to be the easiest building block to find for assumption questions, is the conclusion. Whenever we're dealing with assumption questions, we know that we will have a conclusion. Remember that we have four different types of conclusions. That is, we may have a recommendation, an inference, a prediction, or a plan. In this case, we have a recommendation, and we realize that this may be the conclusion for two reasons. First, the thus, and also the should. The modal should is basically signaling that this is a recommendation. Okay. We also have a premise, and remember that the premise is factual information that basically provides support for the conclusion. In this case, the premise would be research shows that callers are more patient when the machine generated voice is that of a woman. And the rest would be background information. Now, for assumption questions, what we also may need to find is the assumption. In this case, the assumption is something that is not explicitly stated in the passage, but it is a leap that the author takes in between the premise and the conclusion. So it's information that, if we make it negative, may basically damage the argument and the conclusion for that matter. In this case, the assumption is that leap that is taking between the idea that callers are more patient when the machine generated voice is that of a woman, and the conclusion, which is companies should hire women. Now, the assumption in this case would be what the author is using in order to reach that conclusion, the information that the author is assuming. And in this case, the author is assuming that hiring women would have the same effect as having the machine generated voice of a woman. Now, since we will have to damage the conclusion, we would need to make a prediction. right? And in this case, our prediction is going to be negative. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with that assumption and making it negative so that we can damage the conclusion. Because if we assume that the effects that of the machine generated voice of a woman and the voice of a woman is going to be basically the same, the conclusion, we will be strengthening the conclusion. When in reality, here we need to damage. And so, if we turn that into a negative sentence, what we're going to say is something like maybe hiring women or the voice of a woman is not going to have the same effect as the machine generated voice of a woman. Okay, so we have already discussed the first step, identifying the question, the second step, which is deconstructing the argument, and the third step, which is predicting. So, what we will do now is we will take a look at the choices together and we will try to eliminate. A says automated telephone services are becoming cheaper and cheaper every year. So, this option is not really addressing what we needed to address. That is, it's not really damaging the conclusion. Remember that the conclusion is smaller companies should hire women, and that is not doing anything to that conclusion. The same happens with B. Patient customers tend to order more products and return fewer products than impatient customers. Here, it doesn't really matter how patient customers react or how they basically act, and whether they decide to buy more products or not is not relevant for us, at least because it's not doing anything, again, to the conclusion. C says a separate study indicated that the extra patience exhibited by coolers is limited to interactions with an automated system. Okay, here we're getting closer because here we're focusing on that conclusion and on that assumption that we made, which was basically that the author is assuming that the reaction that people will have to machine generated voice of a woman would be the same as they will have with the voice of a woman. But of course, it's negative because we need to damage that. So, what we're saying is actually, people are not showing patience when talking to a woman, but rather this is limited to the automated system. For D, we have some customers prefer automated systems to talking with a live person. Okay, it's not a matter of preference. Be careful with options like this one, even though it may come closer, at least closer than A and B, to the conclusion. Still, this is not a matter of preference, but it's really about how coolers react and whether coolers are more patient or not. Mhm. Um, for E, we have on average, callers are only slightly more patient when interacting with a female voice rather than a male voice in an automated telephone system. Okay, so this one is focusing more on male versus female, but here reality is that the leap that the author is taking between premise and conclusion is focusing on the automated service factor, that is, the machine generated voice of a woman factor, rather than men versus women. Okay, so the correct answer choice here would be C. And that's it. That's how you solve a critical reasoning exercise. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.